remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell, they actually devoted a show. What was it called? The Lives of Fletcher
Yeah, the
Pratt?
lines of Fletcher Prouty. What a
Right.
joke.
Yeah.
What an embarrassment. I mean, those.
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Oh yeah, what's up everybody? It's your boy, the Triple B, and this is episode number 253 of the Lone Gunman Podcast. Welcome. And, if you follow along on YouTube, you would already know what this show is going to be about because you would have watched my short over there explaining exactly what it was. But if you didn't, you're already here. You're going to find out in a little while. But before we get into the show, I want to bring on Big Bad Bob here to talk to you a little bit about Silk City Hot Sauce and what you can do to help support the show and get some damn good hot sauce in return. So, without further ado, here is the big bad one himself, Bob. Big Bad Bob here with you for Silk City Hot Sauces. Why Silk City? Because this hot sauce comes to you directly from Paterson, New Jersey, also known as Silk City. These hot sauces are 100% natural, gluten-free, vegan, contain no chemicals, fillers, dyes, or junk. Everything is packed into recyclable glass containers because glass doesn't leach weird flavors into the product. All other hot sauces are sourced in small batches from locally bought fresh peppers. It's all about the pepper, people. I'm telling you. Your boy, Big Bad Bob, loves his food like he loves his women. Hot and spicy, but not so hot you can't eat them. So, if you love yourself some sauce and you're tired of trying to transform your bland meat into something edible, with the tip of a jar, you will transform your life forever. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com, place an order, and upon checkout, enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, for 20% off of your entire order. You won't regret it. Thank me later. Peace. That's right, folks. 20% off your entire order. Head over to silkcityhotsauce.com and enter the code GUNMAN, that's GUNMAN, at checkout. Pretty simple. And, they have some delicious, delicious hot sauce for very reasonable prices. There's no reason, if you're a hot sauce lover, not to head over to Silk City and grab you some. And you can help support the show by doing so. Also, want to let everybody know, your boy, Big Bad Bob, and my buddy Joe Borelli will be presenting at Lancer, the JFK Lancer Conference this year in Dallas. It's going to be held at the Lorenzo Hotel in person. If you can't get there in person, head over to assassinationconference.com for the virtual streaming presentation. And for any reservations, and registrations, visit jfklancerpublications.com for registration details and ticket options, folks. There is a plethora of awesome speakers with awesome topics for you to get into. And I'm telling you, I can only speak for myself because I don't know what everybody else is talking about. But all I can tell you is what me and Joe been working on for the past year and a half is going to blow your socks off your feet. They're just going to, they're just going to blow right off. We're going to knock them off. So you're not, or you're definitely going to want to tune in to the Lancer conference this year to find out before anybody else does. Get the exclusive all about the Martins at Lancer this year in Dallas. Year of our Lord 2023 for the 60th anniversary. And one more thing before we start the show. My buddy Jason Seelman has compiled for the 60th anniversary commemoration of the assassination of John F. Kennedy a limited edition Lego art set of the man himself. Now, there's two different poses you can choose from. One called the Visionary, the man who stood for a strong, peaceful nation, and the Hopeful, the father to a country with dreams to last generations. More than 3,400 pieces. It measures 15 inches wide by almost 21 inches tall. And if you would like to order your limited edition Lego art set from Jason, email him at jason@2bn.ca. That's the letter 2, actually, that's the number 2, the letter B, the letter N, dot, the letter C, the letter A. So jason@2bn.ca for more details and to order yours today. And if you will be attending Lancer this year, so will Jason, and he will hand deliver your Lego art set, and it will save you $30 to $40 in postage and handling. So these things are amazing looking, and if you want a definite conversation piece hanging on the wall of your house, and you are into this kind of thing, make sure to reserve yours today and order up, folks. Order up. All right, let's get into the show. We're going to be talking today about William Billy Wayne Little Horse Dalzell. Dude's got a lot of names, okay? But he's an interesting guy, and he deserves all his names. And I was tipped by my buddy Will a long time ago to look into this guy. And at the time, I didn't see any significance to doing so. And tangentially, from researching into the Martins, I realized that this guy could possibly be somewhat of a interesting character to talk about because he had his fingers in a lot of pies. Like little Jack Horner, who sat in a corner. But so William Wayne Dalzell, also known as Billy Wayne or Bill Dalzell or William Dalzell or Little Horse Dalzell, because he was an Indian, an indigenous person, right? He was a very smart man. And into a lot of shady things, as we'll come to find out here. But now, he first came into, I guess, on the government radar, at least with the FBI. Interestingly enough, we have an FBI document here to Hoover from the SAC, so that's Special Agent in Charge of Butte, Montana office, which interestingly enough, Guy Bannister was stationed at. Now, I don't think the times line up right for him to be there at this time. I think he was there a little earlier, but I could be wrong. He may have been involved here. I don't know. But they're looking for this guy. They call him Billy Wayne Dalzell, and I guess somehow he violated the Registration Act, which I'm not exactly sure what that is. But this is an FBI memorandum, and it's attention the Domestic Intelligence Division, not the Investigative Division. And it was targeted to Mrs. Pauline Dalzell, which would be his ex-wife at the time. And the purpose of this is to locate subject for an interview. And it says Denver has requested Butte to place this cover since subject has not been located, and apparently all logical leads but this covered. Mrs. Dalzell has heard from subject but did not advise agents as she had promised and may be in correspondence with him. She is not being cooperative. If she is hearing from him, it will probably show on a 30-day cover. I can see no possibility of embarrassment to the Bureau, and I recommend authority be given for this cover. Now, when we're talking cover, okay, we're talking watching their mail, a little surveillance here and there, a little pressure, turning up the heat a little bit. And there's also a note on here. I know this isn't from 1958, like I said. The State Department has expressed the opinion that subject was acting as an intelligence agent when working for Ibo Numer, reportedly an intelligence agent of a network operated by Ethiopian Ministry of Finance. CIA doubted subject to be an intelligence agent, but possibly an informant from Numer, in hopes that Numer could get money from Sinclair Oil Company, for which company subject had formerly worked. Department has advised more complete information needed regarding nature of operation by Numer and part played by Dalzell in this operation. Investigation to date has failed to locate subject for purposes of interview. Mrs. Pauline Dalzell, on interview, stated she planned to divorce subject and would advise the Bureau if she heard from him, but has proven to be uncooperative in that respect. J.D. Donahue advises a mail cover is within the quota. So yeah, they're basically gonna start watching her mail to see if they're corresponding with each other. So we fast forward a month or so, and we have another memorandum, FBI memorandum to Hoover from the SAC in Butte, and justification is to locate Billy Wayne Dalzell. Extreme necessity of locating subject. Logical leads covered. Pauline Dalzell, his wife, has been interviewed numerous times, and although she has indicated she will cooperate, will not do so. So Pauline ain't no snitch. Good for her. Good for her. Now they go through and they're talking about this guy, and he says that admits 3 arrests in 1960, 2 for insufficient check charges, and for investigation of burglary, and 1 additional arrest for driving while intoxicated. Education. Georgetown University. Major, diplomatic foreign relations and languages. Oh, did I also say this guy spoke 4 or 5 languages? And graduated from Georgetown with a major in diplomatic foreign relations. This guy's got CIA stamped all over him. Employment present. It says WNOE radio station newscaster from 11/1/60 to present. Previous employment at statewide bail bonding, New Orleans, Louisiana. Worked there for about 2 weeks in October of 1960. Previous employment prior, 1159 Dixie Oil Drilling Company at the Saratoga Building, supervisor H&S Brigman. In May of 1960, William Wayne Dalzell was arrested by the New Orleans Police Department on suspicion of burglary and bad checks. In May of 60, Dalzell claimed that he was formerly employed by the Dixieland Drilling Company, and that in 1959 he entered into agreement with the Council of the Government of Yemen in Washington, D.C., to try to market an oil concession for the government of Yemen covering an area of 4,000 square miles. In May of 1960, Dalzell made the statement that he went to Washington, New York, and California to make contacts with representatives of oil companies in an effort to market the oil concession for the government of Yemen. He also stated that he was in contact with the charge d'affaires of the government of Yemen on 16th Street, Washington, D.C., on numerous occasions, and that he maintained an account at the Bank of Commerce in Washington, D.C., under the name of W. Dalzell. During the negotiations to sell this oil concession, he mentioned that this account had become overdrawn and some insufficient fund checks were returned to him. Dalzell also stated that he had contacts that wanted to convert $750,000 American money to Cuban pesos at the rate of 4 to 1 for $250,000 and 4.5 to 1 for $500,000. So, this guy, like I said before, he had fingers in all kinds of pies. But he was also being watched very intently. So, on January the 10th, 1961, New Orleans T1 furnished the following information. Sergio Arcacha Smith, on January 9th, 1961, had allegedly stated that the revolution in Cuba was to start on January 28th, 1961, and allegedly expressed some fears that he was being followed by pro-Castro people in New Orleans who hang out at Dominic's Bar in the 600 block of St. Philip Street. On January 7th, 1961, Lieutenant Commander Richardson, recruiting officer of the Naval Air Station, Alvin Callender Field, Belle Chase, Louisiana, advised that one Jack Martin of Pryor Street in New Orleans, described by Richardson as a, quote, con man in public relations and detective work, had called the Naval Air Station on January 5th, 1961, attempting to locate Commander Charlie Noble, a former naval aviator whose secondary billet was a public relations officer. According to Richardson, Noble was in New Orleans for retirement. And according to Richardson, Martin had stated that Sergio Arcacha Smith, a former Cuban official, turned over to Guy Bannister, a private detective in New Orleans, quote, a code book from the former Cuban consulate in New Orleans, as well as a list of some 350 names of people who are registered as part of the Castro-Cuban Revolutionary Array, now residing in the city of New Orleans. So, Jack Martin is passing on information, basically that Sergio Arcacha Smith and Guy Bannister have gotten their hands on a code book from the former Cuban consulate and have a list of 350 names of people who are registered as part of the Castro-Cuban Revolutionary Array, now residing in the city. These are pro-Castro people, not anti-Castro. Sergio Arcacha Smith, according to information received from Lieutenant Commander Richardson, has an office at 207B in the Balter Building, 404 St. Charles Street, New Orleans. He has 2 children who are still in Cuba, for whose safety he is fearful. Richardson related that through Martin, Smith was attempting to enlist the aid of a naval aviator to fly down to Cuba to retrieve his children. So Jack Martin is trying to set up a rescue operation to get Sergio Arcacha Smith's kids out of Cuba. On January 7, 1961, Commander McRobert, recruiting officer for officer personnel, Naval Air Station Alvin Callender Field, Belle Chase, Louisiana, advised that on the permission of the commanding officer and the executive officer of the Naval Air Station, he met with Sergio Akasha Smith at the Roosevelt Hotel at 3:30 p.m. on January 6th and took him to McRobert's home located on Frankfurt Street. McRobert ascertained the following information from Sergio Akasha Smith. Smith is a graduate lawyer in international law from Columbia University in New York City. Smith also attended Beelan College in Havana and was born in that city on January 22nd, 1923. Smith's last post for the Cuban government was that of a consul at Bombay, India in 1954. According to McRobert, Smith stated that his purpose in contacting the Navy through Martin was that Martin told him he could possibly hire a naval aviator to fly his children, Elena, age 12, and Anna, age 10, to the United States from Havana, where they live with their grandmother, at 26, number 311, apartment 26, Vedado. McRobert related that Smith is fearful for the safety of these two children, insomuch as he is chief of the Fronte Revolucionario Democratico unit in New Orleans. The headquarters for this organization is P.O. Box 379, Coral Gables, Florida. According to Commander McRobert, Smith's boss, a Dr. Antonio Verona of Miami, Florida, is chief and head of captioned organization. McRobert also related that Smith is married and lives in New Orleans with his wife and children Luis and Dulce Maria, age 3, at the home of one Von Mayer on Canal Boulevard in New Orleans. Commander McRobert stated that in civilian clothes he accompanied Smith to the FRD headquarters at the Balter Building, where he was shown a beat-up code book which was identified to him by Smith as that taken from the New Orleans Cuban consulate. Commander McRobert stated he was shown a back room at that location where he saw several thousand handout-type cans which will be placed around New Orleans to solicit funds to promote the overthrow of the Castro regime. It's noted that inquiry of William Dalzell concerning this matter could compromise our source, and it is requested that this be done in mind by your agency in the event inquiries are made. So there's that. Next up, we have another FBI memorandum to Hoover from the SAC in New Orleans. Subject crime, or Crimdell, whatever that means. Crimdell. Subject Grady C. Durham was a practicing attorney in the city of New Orleans until approximately January 1st, at which time he disappeared and his current whereabouts are unknown. PCI, that's Paid Confidential Informant Redacted, advised on May the 14th of 62 that Grady Durham is a nephew of Governor Jimmy Davis, governor of Louisiana, and was very close to Governor Davis politically. This source advised that charges have been filed in the Criminal District Court Parish of New Orleans alleging that Durham had misappropriated a client's funds. Various reports have been received by the source alleging that Durham has gone to Australia or Mexico. His current whereabouts are unknown. Source advised that most of her information was received from Jack Martin, a private detective, and his associate, William Wayne Dalzell. Source advised that Jack Martin, at the request of Grady Durham, went to Durham's law office where he obtained, or stole, all of Durham's files and papers and secreted them to prevent them falling into the hands of the local authorities. Source advised that Martin, while examining the records, called William Wayne Dalzell, his associate, on the telephone and listed all the files and the amount of money that Durham had misappropriated, and Dalzell recorded all of this information. Martin claimed that McNeil told him this shortly before the DA's office was changed and the new district attorney, Jim Garrison, took office. Martin stated that he received other information that Durham was working at the El Progreso Club in Mexico City as a dice dealer. Martin stated that relatives in Australia have claimed that Durham is not in Australia, although it's a pretty goddamn big country. The following background information regarding Durham, Martin, and Dalzell is contained in the New Orleans files. Jack Martin claimed to be a private investigator and frequently uses the title Colonel Jack Martin. On October the 4th, 1954, he wrote to Vice President Richard Nixon, claiming to be a special features editor of the West Bank Herald and reported alleged irregularities of the local authorities of Jefferson Parish. Martin has also been the subject of several impersonation cases when it has been alleged that he has represented himself to be connected with the federal government. February 10th, 1961, he telephonically contacted the Bureau requesting information regarding a Charles F. Riker. Martin, who is believed to be identical with Edward Stewart Suggs, who is wanted on a murder charge in Houston. However, information was received from the New Orleans Police Department that Suggs was not actually wanted in Texas anymore as of January 17, 1957. In 1957, Martin was a patient of the psychiatric ward of the Charity Hospital in New Orleans. Jack Martin advised he is a private investigator and a close associate of Grady Durham. After Durham disappeared at the request of Durham's wife Hazel, he went to the law office of Grady Durham and took a number of files from his office, which he delivered to Louise Decker of St. Tammany Parish, a close associate of Governor Jimmy Davis. Louise Decker delivered the files to Governor Davis, who is now supposed to have them in his possession. Martin advised that he only took the files which contained information which would be, quote, embarrassing to Mrs. Durham, as he did not want her, quote, a lovely woman, to know what a bum her husband was. Martin advised that he recalls that one of the files involved an estate in Arizona in which the people were wiring him for their money, and another file involved a Baptist church in Mississippi for whom Durham had sold some property and not given the church the money. Martin stated that the New Orleans Bar Association and the Louisiana Bar Association had received complaints that Durham had pressed the local DA's office to take charges. Martin advised that when the charge was filed, Durham had already disappeared. But to assist Mrs. Durham, he had contacted a Dr. Sanchez, who was a psychiatrist in Metairie, and had Dr. Sanchez write a letter to the parish coroner, Dr. Nicholas Chetta, indicating that Durham was a mental case. This letter had been made available to the DA's office, and as a result, no additional charges have been filed against Durham. Martin advised that Durham is a very capable attorney who apparently became addicted to gambling at the Paul Murphy Chess Club, and he believed that this is where all of Durham's money was lost. Martin advised that the first assistant district attorney, J. David McNeil, told him that he had received a phone call indicating that Durham had been disposed of by a Jefferson Parish gambler to whom Durham owed money. That means that he had been killed. Martin at various times has been associated with former Bureau employee W. Guy Bannister, who operates a private detective agency in New Orleans, Louisiana. William Wayne Dalzell claims to be an American Indian, native of Oklahoma, who has been arrested in New Orleans for fraudulent checks and at one time accused of stealing a valuable ring from a woman with whom he was living with in New York. He was not charged with this offense. Dalzell also claimed in the past to be an oil promoter and worked for various oil companies in Arabia and Ethiopia. Dalzell and Grady Durham were active in the formation of the Free Voice of Latin America, which was formed on December the 5th, 1960, to transmit information via shortwave radio to the people of Cuba. Durham is possibly identical with a former assistant collector of the U.S. Internal Revenue Service, New Orleans, and according to Jack Martin, holds the rank of major, either in the Louisiana National Guard or the U.S. Army Reserves. The reliability of the information reflected above is highly questionable in view of the fact that both are highly erratic individuals and both are of the con men type. However, it has been established that Grady Durham, a New Orleans attorney, is missing for New Orleans, and there is a criminal charge filed against him for misappropriation of funds. In view of the current charge outstanding against Grady Durham, the information supplied by Martin regarding the manner in which he disposed of Durham's files will be furnished to Jim Garrison, the district attorney of the parish of Orleans. So, very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. And I found this little connection here. Well, this is from FBI documents, and this is investigating Carlos Marcello. And one of the things in here says, we'll locate and interview William Wayne Dalzell, subject of New Orleans case 105-1503, who allegedly relayed an offer from Marcello to the New Orleans unit of the Cuban Revolutionary Front for a contribution of $200,000. Bureau authority granted for interview with Dalzell per bullet dated 4/26/61 and entitled Carlos Marcello, aka anti-racketeering charges. So that's interesting. Now, Dalzell's name comes up again, of course, in the Garrison investigation in New Orleans. They talk about him quite a lot. He was interviewed at the grand jury on November the 2nd, 1967, by Jim Garrison. And I'm not going to read the whole thing because that would take forever. But some of the more interesting parts of this interview is that Dalzell lived on Dauphine Street, okay, at the same time Clay Shaw did, because they asked him, Mr. Dalzell, where do you live now? 528 Dauphine Street. They determined his family is from Cheyenne, Wyoming. He was born in Oklahoma. Blah blah blah. They asked him, "Has your family name been changed to Dalzell, or is it still the original Indian name?" And he says, "No, my mother remarried, and it was changed. It was Little Horse. So his name was William Little Horse." So after his mom remarried, they dropped the Little Horse, and his name is Dalzell. So they established that, and they go through a lot of things, asking him about how much longer he plans to stay in New Orleans, what kind of work he's engaged in. Presently, he says, "I am president of the American Oil Company." And when you look into his background, he worked for all these small oil companies that maybe employed one or two people. See, back then, a lot of these guys tried to act like they're oil prospectors and broker land deals and oil deals with foreign countries and big money interests. And if they were successful in doing so, they can make a lot of money. But most of these places were, propped up and didn't last long, and really didn't really amount to much. But they go in and they ask him, "What languages do you speak?" He says, "Arabic, Spanish, Italian, Ethiopian, and English." And of course, Native American. So that's 6 languages this guy knows. And they say, "That's a remarkable variety of languages. Am I correct in understanding your facility in speaking languages is related to the fact that you're able to speak Indian? Is there any relationship, or did you make an attempt to study these languages?" And he says, "I majored in languages at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and diplomatic foreign relations." "When did you finish at Georgetown?" "In 1953, sir." "Where did you go to work when you finished at Georgetown?" And he says, "To Peru in South America." And they say, "For what employer?" And he says, "Independent contractor." Next question is, have you ever worked for the United States government? And he says, yes, I did. During what years? 1951 to 53. Now, he graduated in 53, folks, at Georgetown. So while he's at Georgetown and studying diplomatic foreign relations and foreign languages, he is working for the United States government, specifically a research analyst for the Department of Defense. So this guy is no dummy, folks. No dummy whatsoever. And like I said before, this guy's got CIA stamped all over his forehead, given his bona fides, if you will. So, very interesting stuff there. Next up, we have a little bit of transcribed scuttlebutt from some of these tapes from Garrison office where they would sit around and have bull sessions. And of course, again, we're not going to go over the whole thing, but the prevalent part. Garrison says now two Jags, that's Gerard Two Jags, whom Oswald actually worked for in New Orleans at a very young age as a delivery boy, messenger boy, whatever you want to call him. They were in the import-export business. Or maybe it was the dentist. I can't remember. But anyway, Gerard Two Jags, okay. So Garrison says now, Two Jags in turn was on the board of directors of the list of incorporators forming the Friends of Democratic Cuba. See, we've got one huge structure here, really. Somebody else says it isn't that huge. Garrison says, well, one part connects with the other, and in a sense, you can go in a circle. It isn't that huge, you're right. You end up looking at Friends for Democratic Cuba, and you see Bannister, Two Jags, Grady Durham, William Dalzell, had a key to at the post office just like all the others. Now, what he's referring to here is a P.O. box that was a kind of a message drop box that allegedly Oswald had a key to, William Dalzell had a key to. Who else? What's his face? Ah, damn it. It's right on the tip of me tongue. Thomas Beckham. Jesus Christ. Had a key to. And Jack Martin had a key to as well. Somebody else says Dalzell Associates, and then he lived in the American Embassy in Rome. He was an assistant something director in Ethiopia. Garrison says, yeah, speaks Swahili and half a dozen languages. And very tough, very cool. I spent an hour with him in the grand jury. He knows nothing at all about the Central Intelligence Agency, allegedly. He went to Georgetown and speaks half a dozen languages. And somebody else says, merely lived in the American Embassy in Rome. Merely had a company called Dalzell Associates in Washington, D.C. Garrison says, and I said, what are you doing now? And he says, I'm busy working with an Ethiopian oil company. Somebody says, do you know, does he know you had an Ethiopian pipeline coming in here? Bill Boxley says he knows all about the CIA because he knew exactly what building there near the Lincoln Memorial. The old wave barracks were used by the agency back in the early 40s. He knows that was the clandestine operations training center at that time. He told me that. Garrison, there are some people you can do almost anything, or you can do almost nothing with, though. He's one of them. Boxley says, he said he was Signal Corps intelligence. Somebody else says, how about this fellow who went with the American Medical Association, political action group in Chicago? Anybody hit him up? Somebody says, who is that? And they say, he's a guy like Dalzell. I think he was a newspaper man in India. Richard Baldwin. Yeah. Garrison says, yeah, that's Ed Baldwin's brother. He's CIA. And Boxley says, Dalzell was mentioned on that part of the ferry note that got Xerox too, isn't he? And somebody else says, yep, yep, yep. So, the web of conspiracy grows deeper and deeper and deeper, folks. Now, before Garrison pulled this guy into the grand jury, um, they interviewed him at the office of the district attorney on Tuesday, May 9th, in 1967. Arkasha Smith mentioned that Bill Dalzell and some of the other Americans who had been hanging around the front office suggested starting a new group with Americans, which Americans could join, to be called the Friends of Democratic Cuba. The Cuban Revolutionary Democratic Front was a group headed by Arkasha Smith, consisting of Cubans, and the Friends of Democratic Cuba was a group which consisted of Americans and which worked hand in hand with the Cuban Revolutionary Front. Dalzell asked me if I would be willing to let him use my name on the letterhead. Next thing I knew, I was down as the president of the organization. The group was in existence for about 4 or 5 weeks after its inception, which was January 9th, 1961. So maybe this isn't an interview with Dalzell. Not sure who this is with then. It doesn't say. Maybe we can figure it out if we keep reading. They go on about the group. All the group did then was to get some furniture into a downstairs office in the Balter building, and we had a few meetings, but the people who came to those meetings mainly were Cubans from the Cuban Revolutionary Front. We actually never really had many American members. We had no formal membership card. The only thing the Friends of Democratic Cuba ever did, really, was to shake hands on Mardi Gras Day on Canal Street once. About 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks after the thing was started, I was called over to the FBI office, and Mr. Call told me to dissolve the organization. When I asked him for a reason to give the people, he told me simply to tell them that it was in violation of the law and working with a foreign power, and if we didn't dissolve, they might be arrested. I went back and told them the organization was through. When I was first contacted by Arkasha and asked if I wanted to handle publicity for the Cuban Revolutionary Democratic Front, which was organized in November or December of '60, I called Admiral Warder, who was then commandant of the 8th Naval District, who was a roommate of mine when we were at Annapolis. I asked him to check with his naval intelligence man to find out if it was all right for me to work with these people or not. The naval intelligence man then contacted me and set up an appointment with a man at the FBI who used the name Mr. Call. Get it? I Mr. Call. From the time forward until after the Bay of Pigs, whenever I had anything to report to the FBI or whenever I was contacted by them, the man was always the man I described as Mr. Call. The one outstanding feature he had was very light blue eyes, extremely light blue eyes. I would guess he was somewhat taller than I am, maybe 5'10" or 5'11". He was not heavy set. He was the kind of leathery sort of face that someone who had served in the Navy a long time has. He had black hair, as I remember it. It was not patent leather black hair, perhaps a little kinky, though not really. So very light blue eyes and patent or black hair, but not kinky. My last contact with these people was made in the summer of '61, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, when I received a call from Admiral Warder, who suggested that I should no longer have contact with the Cuban Revolutionary Democratic Front. Some of the people who were in Arkasha's company before the Bay of Pigs were Dr. Delhaya and a Menendez, perhaps a Louis, also a big husky Latin type who was with the Honduras Revolutionary Front. After the Bay of Pigs, he was constantly in the company of Carlos Lopez, Julio Buznado, and Enrique Sagaz. Question: do you know Gerard Tujay? No. There were a number of Americans who were neighbors or friends of Arkasha's whose names I don't remember that I've met. He may have been one of those. There was one man who was an American, but his wife is Cuban, and I don't remember their names. Do you know Grady Durham? No. At least I don't remember the name. Did you say that you were aware of the Cuban Revolutionary Front and the Friends of Democratic Cuba were both working with the FBI? Yes, I was aware that the FBI was supervising the actions of the Cuban Revolutionary Democratic Front. As far as the Friends of Democratic Cuba is concerned, I know of the conversations which I have already described. If they had more control than that, I don't know. Are you aware, in January of 61, a person by the name of Joseph Moore and another person by the name of Oswald attempted to purchase 10 trucks from Bolton Ford? Answer, I was not aware of that. Did you ever hear Akasha claim that the CIA was involved in either Friends of Democratic Cuba or the Cuban Revolutionary Front? Answer is he always said that the CIA had approved the Revolutionary Front and was supervising the invasion from far. Are you familiar with the Neptune Shipping Company? Have you ever heard the name Captain Andy mentioned in connection with the Neptune Shipping Company? No. In connection with your Cuban type activities, you have never had occasion to meet or hear the name of Clay Shaw? No. I met David Ferry once. We had a fundraising party prior to the Bay of Pigs at the coffee house on Exchange Alley. The proceeds from the night's entertainment were to go to the front. Ferry showed up there, which was the only time I saw him from the Bay of Pigs. I understand from what you all said that he became more active later. Did you have occasion to talk to him? Only for a few minutes. He said he was a pilot and wanted to train flyers. My impression was that he wasn't allowed to do anything prior to the Bay of Pigs. He wanted to train flyers for the front. In other words, his feelings were the same as the anti-Castro groups. Yes, he wanted to do something, but it was my impression that he was not accepted at that time. But they could have been keeping something from me. So, very interesting stuff, very interesting stuff. So, in a inter-office memorandum, and I'm talking about Garrison's inter-office here, they talk about interviewing Betty Parrott. Now, Betty Parrott, which is a very appropriate name, she is actually New Orleans T1, folks. She's the snitch. She is the one sharing all this shit with Garrison's office. So get this. On March 31st, 67, I interviewed Betty Parrott and learned from her that she had an extremely close relationship with Bill Dalzell. It seems that Bill Dalzell lived in her home for a certain period of time. That means they were boinking, folks. During the time that Bill Dalzell lived at her home, she said that he was involved with a group known as the Friends of Cuba. This group had its offices in the Balter building. Members of the group included Sergio Akasha Smith, Bill Craig, Bill Dalzell, Grady Durham, an individual named Logan, who was also a member of the CIA, Bill Klein, an attorney, Regis Kennedy, a member of the FBI, an individual named Hoffman, Guy Bannister, and an individual named Easterling, which is interesting because remember a couple episodes ago when we were talking about Henry Hertz's book, Reasonable Doubt, and the chapter included in that we talked about this fellow Easterling? Interesting. She said that although Dalzell was very secretive about the operation of the group, she said that from the conversations that she overheard over a period of time, she learned that the group was involved in an undercover operation in conjunction with the CIA and FBI, which involved the shipment and transportation of individuals, that's people, and supplies in and out of Cuba. She said that many times FBI agent Regis Kennedy would come over to the house and talk to Dalzell concerning various operations. She also said that many times Regis Kennedy came to the office in the Balter building to talk to Dalzell And in turn, Dalzell and other members of his group visited Regis Kennedy in his office at the local FBI headquarters. She said that Regis Kennedy confirmed to her the fact that Clay Shaw is a former CIA agent who did some work for the CIA in Italy over a 5-year span in the 50s, which is pretty goddamn accurate. Thank you, Betty Parrott, giving this information to Garrison in 1967. So the FBI knew very early on that Shaw, in fact, did work for the CIA in Italy over a 5-year span, which basically, you know, in the course of his trademark duties and travel and permandex stuff. Yeah. She said this group later moved from their office in the Balter building and moved to an office in the International Trade Mart and then operated under the name of the Voice of Cuba or the Friends of Democratic Cuba. Very interesting. She said what she does not know, whether or not Clay Shaw had any connection with his group, and that she does not remember hearing Shaw's name mentioned. She said that Bill Dalzell could tell us everything about the group and about the connection with Regis Kennedy and the CIA. She said that Bill Dalzell has an open charge against him in New York, which she believes is gun theft. She said that Joe Bolden had the entire file on Bill Dalzell and can give all the information we need in regard to this charge. She said for some reason she has heard Bill Dalzell's name mentioned quite often since the investigation started. She said that approximately 2 weeks ago, Dalzell made a trip to New Orleans and spoke to Steve Plotkin and heard he left town. So, very interesting stuff there from Betty Parrott. And then we have another interoffice memorandum. Let's see. And this one says, interview with BP, otherwise known as the second Parrott interview. I talked with BP in reference to her knowledge concerning the Friends of Democratic Cuba. BP informed me that she'd only been to the office in the Balter building 3 or 4 times. She said that Joseph Moore was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps a few months after World War II. Betty Parrott said that he was in his late 20s, had honey blonde hair, blue eyes, 5'8", 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighed about 150 pounds. She said he came into town the same week in which Bill Dalzell formed the Friends of Democratic Cuba and opened the office in the Balter building. She said this was around late November or December of 1960. She said that Moore was from the United States and not from Peru, and that she only heard him speak English. Betty said that the person who wrote the letter may have gotten his address mixed up because of one of Moore's associates was Dalzell. And Dalzell had a partner in some kind of deal in Lima, Peru. Now, we touched on this before when they asked him what his first job was out of Georgetown. It was Peru as an independent contractor, whatever that means. Betty Parrott said she is pretty certain that Moore, who was a paratrooper in the Marine Corps, took part in the Bay of Pigs, and she is under the impression that he was killed in the Bay of Pigs. She said that when Moore left New Orleans, he went straight to Miami. She does not know where he lived in town, but Akasha and Dalzell got him a room somewhere around the office, she believes. Betty said that Moore had a southern accent, possibly from the Southwest, and left right before Christmas of 1960, and in all was only around the office for about 2 or 3 week period. She said that he just floated in and said that he had read about the Friends of Democratic Cuba in the paper. Betty Parrott also said that Guy Bannister had files on all of the people around the office at the time, that Logan was a CIA man assigned to Arcasha and the Friends of Democratic Cuba, and his counterpart from the FBI was Regis Kennedy. She said that Logan was good friends with Grady Durham, and that both of them belonged to the chess club around the Maritime building. She said all members of the group were screened by the FBI and CIA. Betty Parrott said Logan was tall, Distinguished had dark hair and worked out of the New Orleans office of the CIA. She said she knew of no car that Moore had. She also stated that we should check into the waiters of some random restaurants in New Orleans, that they might know something. So all this is very, very interesting. All of this is now getting very deeply intertwined here in New Orleans with some of the more colorful characters that we know and we've heard about in the past. So now let's fast forward a bit. We were stuck in the Garrison investigation there for a while. And when he questioned him at the grand jury, Dalzell stated that he might only be in town a couple more weeks. Well, 10 years later, during the HSCA investigation, uh, our old friends Robert Burris and L.J. Delsa tracked down William Dalzell. Guess where he's living, folks? 628 St. Charles Avenue, apartment number 318 in New Orleans, Louisiana. So he is still in Louisiana 10 years later. Interview: Mr. Dalzell stated that he speaks 6 languages and has been getting out of practice by not using most of them, but he is fluent in Spanish. In addition to the languages, he speaks several dialects of Aramaic and Swahili. He asked if the select committee had a white male investigator by the name of Singleton or Shingleton. This man had been in the Paradise bar asking questions about his connections with the Cubans and Radio Free Cuba. He is described as approximately 45 to 50 years old, well-dressed, and had a northern accent. Mr. Dalzell was advised that this committee did not have anyone that fit that description doing field interviews. See page 2 for interview. So, somebody's creeping around impersonating House Select Committee investigators and questioning people. Shocker. Okay, so on December 9th, 1977, investigators Bob Burris and L.J. Delsa met with William Willie Billy Little Horse Dalzell at the Paradise Bar. Now, not like paradise is in heaven, but this is a dice, like the kind you shake in your hand and then roll. Paradise Bar, located at 241 Decatur Street in New Orleans, Louisiana. Now, this is a very interesting location for this thing, as you can remember from previous shows. Also located on Decatur Street in the 100 block, where Carlos Bernier's store, Orestes Pena's bar, and then the next block you have the Paradise Bar, where Bill Dalzell is now working. It says Mr. Dalzell is a part-time bartender at the bar, and Jack S. Martin introduced the investigators to Mr. Dalzell. So, again, from previous shows, we talked about Jack Martin's HSCA interview, and he took them to where Bill Dalzell was working. Interesting that they still knew each other 10 years later. Mr. Dalzell did not have a lot of time to talk with investigators, but consented to a short conversation. He was waiting on word from a large oil company that had a well blowing wild in the Gulf of Mexico. He was proposing to dive in about 80 feet of water and attach a cap that he had invented some time ago and is patented. Later conversation with him revealed that the company had to refuse because the insurance companies would not or could not cover the venture. He agreed to speak further with the investigators at a later date. But Mr. Dalzell stated that he had worked with the Central Intelligence Agency in the early 50s in Arlington, Virginia. He was attending Georgetown University at the same time, and between the two jobs, he overworked himself and quit school and the agency. He stated that he would help in any way possible because he's still loyal to the agency and the United States. While working for the CIA, he was in the Arabic section, mostly dealing with codes and radio transmissions. He was a cryptologist with top secret clearance. After leaving the agency, he knocked around in South America and the Far East. Just when he seemed to be getting set up as an advisor and in good standing with Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, the garrison probe began and everyone dropped him like a hot potato. He's been down and out since that time, but still hopes to do something with his wheelhead attachment that will prevent blowouts of underwater oil uh, wells. He knew Jack Martin before the 61 Bay of Pigs invasion, and he volunteered to help the anti-Castro Cubans in New Orleans. He worked for Arcasha Smith and set up the medical supply units that would help in the invasion. He only worked with the Americans that wanted to join. He would get an application from them and send them first to New Orleans Blood Bank to donate a pint of blood, and then some of them he would put up in the Balter building located at 403 St. Charles. Colonel Bluford Balter donated office space for the men. As many as 60 at a time were bunked in like soldiers. They had a mess hall there and they fed the men. The men did not get any training and no guns were allowed on the premises. Most of the men got tired of doing nothing and left quickly. Others stayed for a while. If any went to Cuba, Dalzell claims he doesn't know about them. He was not paid by Arcasha Smith and was only used to get blood and medical supplies. He feels that Arcasha Smith was looking more for money than anything else. He seems surprised that Arcasha Smith might be back in Miami because of the anger towards him by some Cubans. Mr. Dalzell was going to jump into the Escambray Mountains and radio signals out before the invasion, but felt that this might not be a good idea. He is not certain that he is now certain that it would not have been a good idea. Dalzell stated that he did not know Ferry personally, but that Ferry did make 2 drops of medical supplies in Cuba. Both drops reportedly landed in Castro's hands. Shocker. Good aim, Ferry. Both Dalzell and Martin expressed the idea that the anti-Castro Cubans were suspicious of the Americans, and things like this drop only served to confirm their suspicions that all was not well. Dalzell was vague when asked about his whereabouts during the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he wasn't pressed about that date or November of 1963. He has a lot of information about the times that we will talk about further before pressing him on subjects which he seems reluctant to want to talk about. Mr. Dalzell went to school with and knows well Mr. Nick Poppich. He is presently in large companies and oil companies, and according to Dalzell, is worth a few $1,000,000. Poppich owned land across from Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans. Poppich knows the Marcello family well, and unconfirmed reports from some sources state that this land might have been used to train Cubans. On one occasion, Dalzell drove Arcasha Smith to the Slidell area to a training camp. Dalzell stated that he did not get out of the car, but waited while Smith went to take care of business. Mr. Dalzell stated that he doesn't know if he could find the land again. This area was and still is sparsely populated, and it was hard to remember a remote area. Mr. Poppich owned the 7 Crown Ranch in Lacombe, Louisiana, in Slidell, and sold the land to a Mr. Salvador Sammy Marcello. This is the same Sammy Marcello that is identified in meetings where Thomas Beckham stated that the assassination of President Kennedy was discussed. Mr. Dalzell and his connections with Sergio Arcasha Smith, Nick Poppich, and Salvatore Marcello will be investigated further. End of memo. So that was the first interview. In January, late January of 1978, they conducted another interview with William Dalzell and states thusly. Mr. Dalzell had previously been interviewed by L.J. Delsa and Bob Burris. However, I re-interviewed him. Again briefly. So this is William Brown, a staff investigator. This is not Burris and Delsa. He states that before the Bay of Pigs, he was employed as a private investigator for a firm under the name of Jack Martin, Newborough, and Dalzell. They did a lot of routine private investigator work, such as divorce cases and things of that nature. He further states that he started an organization called the Friends of Democratic Cuba, and that Guy Bannister was asked to be on their board of directors along with an Alfred. The last name is spelled Chittenden, and the reason for this, he wanted to make sure that any monies collected were put to proper use. He said he used to visit a restaurant, Mancuso's, and a bar and grill known as the Cats and Jammer, along with Guy Bannister, and that was where Martin and Bannister were drinking the night of the 22nd, and when Bannister pistol whipped his ass. He also stated that Mr. K, who had an office in the Masonic building and who identified himself as a CIA agent, asked him to furnish information relative to any Cuban communication systems that he was able to uncover. He said that on occasions he did go into the Masonic building, but couldn't remember the office, but he felt that it was above the offices of the FBI, and he did give this Mr. K certain information that he obtained. He said that he left New Orleans sometime in 62 or 63 before the assassination. He also stated that there was considerable activity in the area around the Balter Building and 544 Camp Street, but he couldn't identify any office that was the center of this activity. He knew Arcasha Smith as his office was over the FDC office in the Balter Building. He was shown photographs, and he identified the following photographs by numbers: 5, 7, 13, 16, 23, 26, 24 as a possible. 8, he states, has seen him in the area but doesn't know him. With regard to Carlos Bernier, he said Carlos helped them to obtain blood and clothing. For further information, the memo submitted by Dalzell and Burris should be reviewed. So that was done by William Brown in 1978. And just to jump backwards, just a Cooney hair here. This is from the Domestic Intelligence Division of the FBI, and this is an informative note dated April of 1967. And it states this: we have previously received information that William Wayne Dalzell is a friend of Clay Shaw, and that New Orleans District Attorney Garrison suspects that Dalzell is providing information to Shaw's attorney to assist in the defense of Clay Shaw. Our files disclose in 1961 Dalzell was involved with individuals in New Orleans in anti-Castro activities. Our files also contain information that Dalzell was hospitalized in a Louisiana State Mental Hospital in 1963, reportedly being discharged from such hospital on March the 20th, 1963. By letter dated March 20th, 67, we furnished information to the Attorney General regarding Dalzell and of District Attorney Garrison's interest in Dalzell. Copies of attached memorandum are being furnished to the Attorney General, and we are referring the Attorney General to our previous letter of March 20th, 1967. So, the FBI is giving Bobby Kennedy information about William Dalzell's activities in New Orleans. Oh, wow. So, you see how all this is interconnected, and all these people are, their names keep coming up. They keep coming up. They're all interconnected. They all know each other. It seems like New Orleans was such a small place back then, where everybody, knew everybody, and all this clandestine spy game shit was going on, and people ratting on each other, and you have the CIA and the FBI, you know, COINTELPROing these anti and pro Castro groups. It's wild stuff, wild times, man, back then. All right. And lastly, here from the files of Harold Weisberg, folks. I believe this is one of his random chapter outlines called the New Orleans Connection. States thusly. New Orleans in the 1960s, with its sizable Cuban colony, was a receptive arm of the Cuba Project that reached over from Miami. In 1960, the Front sent Sergio Acosta Smith to New Orleans, where he established an office in the Balter Building, and, according to William Turner, received CIA money for his anti-Castro activities. In addition to CIA money, Smith engaged in several fundraising activities and became associated with Ronnie Kerr, a public relations man in the New Orleans area. Kerr solicited support from such prominent conservatives as Dr. Alton Ochsner of the Ochsner Clinic and William Riley of the Riley Coffee Company, a one-time employer of Lee Harvey Oswald. The creation of the Friends of Democratic Cuba by Arcasha Smith, with the aid of Guy Bannister, Grady Durham, and William Bill Dalzell, was, according to an unnamed insider, an undercover operation in conjunction with the CIA and FBI, which involved the shipment and transportation of individuals and supplies in and out of Cuba. Now, we just heard this, okay? This is corroboration, as they call it, folks. Turner says that the FDC had as its liaison with the intelligence community one Guy Johnson, a reserve commander of the ONI, a Lloyd Ray of the CIA, and Regis Kennedy of the FBI. According to Turner's sources, Regis Kennedy bypassed local FBI authorities and sent daily reports directly to the assistant to the director, John P. Moore, in Washington, D.C. A discussion of the situation in and around New Orleans about the time of the Bay of Pigs invasion indicates that the CIA leased a banana boat flying a Costa Rican flag to Nino Diaz, co-founder of the MRR. The boat, called a Santa Ana, was to be used to transport men for a landing planned as diversionary measure at the time of the primary invasion. A training camp north of Lake Pontchartrain was used by Diaz with Arcasha, coordinating their activities. Drawn to the Cuba Project inevitably was former FBI agent Guy Bannister. His background activities in anti-communist leagues, the Minutemen in Louisiana, according to Jerry Milton Brooks, made this a natural movement, and his office at 544 Camp Street became a vortex for all kinds of conspirators. Turner says that William Dalzell is, quote, an ex-CIA man who was a mainspring of the Friends of Democratic Cuba, virtually lived on the second floor of 544 Camp Street. Ricardo Davis told of a discussion involving the placing of poison in the ventilating system of the Havana Presidential Palace and killing all occupants. Jack Martin claims that Bannister spent long hours with Orlando Piedra, chief of Batista's secret police. David Ferry was also closely associated with the Bannister office operations as the Bay of Pigs loomed. Turner says that Ferry's roommate, Alvin Boboff, said Ferry was used in the undercover operations of the FDC, and Ferry claimed he was working for the CIA, rescuing Cubans out of Castro's prisons in Cuba. Another member of this group was Gordon Novell, who ran a business called Electronic Systems International Corporation, which was an elegant way of saying he was in the tapping and bugging business. According to the New Orleans State's item, Novell operated the Evergreen Advertising Agency as a CIA communications front. Novell, fearful of being called to testify in Garrison's investigation, vacated his apartment so hurriedly that he left behind a letter to a Mr. Weiss, who was his CIA contact. The letter indicated Novell was afraid he might have to testify about top secret matters involving actions of persons connected with the Double Check Corporation in Miami in the first quarter of 1961. Close to the date of the Bay and Pigs invasion, Novell, Ferry, Arcasha, and several other Cubans picked up a load of munitions from a bunker belonging to the Schlumberger Well Services Company. What Garrison charged was a burglary Novell described as a materials pickup made at the direction of his CIA contact. Jack Martin claims that a few days before the, quote, burglary, he heard Guy Bannister making time and date arrangements for the pickup with an executive of Schlumberger. Novell said that the munitions were stored temporarily in his own office, at Ferry's residence, and in Bannister's office. Eventually, they were moved to the lower decks of the Santa Ana, and a week before the invasion, she set off from Algiers naval base and headed for Cuba. This portion of the manuscript apparently incomplete, as the story ends at this juncture. But we can only use our imagination to try to figure out the rest of the story here, folks. But anyway, that's it for this week's episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it shed some light on some things, made some connections in your brain. Use your brain, people. Follow along on socials at the Lone Gunman 7 everywhere. And make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel, the Lone Gunman Podcast. Big things are coming, people. You're not going to want to miss them. So go subscribe now. Right now. Head to YouTube. Hit the goddamn subscribe button. Click it. Do it. Peace.
Don't believe all what they tell